Mujarid and Wadani Ismaaciil Mire, the great Darwiish general who fought for the majestic cause of Somali liberation, leading Darwiish armies into battle from Berbera, the very center of the English rule, to Hobyo and the Sultanate of Ali Yusuf, the ruler of Mudug, and from there all the way to the valley of the river Shabelle in Hiran, central Somalia. Ismaaciil Mire, a son of the Tolbahanti, Ria Kalaigari, was born in the 1870s at the height of the power of the Tolbahanti. After the fall of the kingdom of the great Bokar Wheelwer and sun had set on the Bartire, it might be fairly claimed that the Tolbahanti emerged as the most powerful and most feared tribe in Somalia. That reputation was solidified when Tolbahanti defeated the Ogardin in one of the most bloody, vicious and brutal battles in Somali history. The battle took place below Kabar Ogardin Hills, named after the battle. The Tolbahanti were left as the undisputed masters of northern Somalia, occupying the land from Jidali in the north of Saynag to Sealkerd near the Mudug border in the south. From Kiri in the west to Zilin in the Nugal Valley where they bordered the Majirteen. In the middle of the 19th century, the English sent 2 explorers to prepare the way for English colonization of northern Somalia. Richard Burton landed in the western part of northern Somalia, among the Isaaq. To the east they sent his partner in exploration, a certain Mr. John Speke, who landed at Lascore with a brief to traverse the Tolbahanti country and meet up with his fellow explorer Richard Burton in Harar. Speke's mission was not a complete success as he was not able to proceed through the Tolbahanti country on account of hostility and suspicion that greeted his journey through their land. But he made many discoveries and recorded facts that are useful to us in reconstructing the condition and circumstances of the Tolbahanti clan in the middle of the 19th century. Speke's arrival was greeted with suspicion as he advanced towards the Tolbahanti frontier in the spring of 1855. He received many alarming reports warning him about the Tolbahanti as being a terrible and savage nation who were unsettled by reports of Speke's marking out the Wasanjali land with paper. Speke wrote that he was delayed for 8 days while his motives for traveling through the Tolbahanti lands were being established. He was eventually allowed to proceed, and he recorded the internecine warfare that split the Tolbahanti kingdom into 2 factions in those years. Until that time, the Tolbahanti were under the figurehead command of the hereditary Gurardship of the Baharazain kings, but a schism developed in the early to mid-19th century that saw the rise and investiture of one Kalai Zaram, Maximuud Ugardoyahan, who formed a breakaway Gurardship for the Maximuud Gurard. It was a natural consequence of the growing vigor and rude health of the Tolbahanti clan, whose lands, wealth and population became too large for their affairs to be run by a single Gurard.
These birth pangs of a new order led to ruinous wars between the brother lineages of the Dulbahante that exacted a heavy toll. Despite these discords and intestine wars, Dulbahante presented a united front in opposing what they felt any encroachment by suspicious foreigners. The Dulbahante made it clear to Speke that he could only proceed through their land at their sufferance and authority, and he was confronted with an ultimatum that he should pay for his passage through Dulbahante or else turn back. As a demonstration of the hostile reception he could face, the Dulbahante arranged for Speke to witness a mounted expedition of 4,000 men being assembled for one of the dreaded Dulbahante cavalry raids that were periodically carried out by the descendants of Sechid Hati against their neighboring tribes, both Isaaq and Darude. Raids that spread fear and foreboding throughout the land as the thundering hooves of the Dulbahante horsemen presaged terrible material and human losses. The other people I met here were some Dulbahantas arming for the fight. They said they were 4,000 strong in cavalry, and were slaughtering sheep wholesale for provision on the road. Each man carried a junk of flesh, a skin of water, and a little hay, and was then ready for a long campaign. For they were not soft like the English, their general boast, who must have their daily food. They were hardy enough to work without eating 10 days in succession, if the emergency required it.
It gives us a flavor of the life of the Dulbahante at the time that said Kamax Kamix, the legendary Ali Nalaye warrior and poet, composed his famous poem when the Dulbahante reached the Indian Ocean at Ilig in a bloody march through Majeerteen lands, along the way exacting terrible revenge for a previous attack by the Majeerteen on the Dulbahante.
Before they reached the ocean, they succeeding in sacking the historic capital of the Isman Mahamud Nuba between Iskushaban and Bela. Speak eventually turned back after his fate was spelled out to him in the starkest terms by his native guides. They, the Dulbahante, did not fear guns. The English could not reach them, besides, their fathers had driven Christians from these lands, and if an army was to attack them, they would assemble so many cavalry, and ride in such rapidity around them, that their gunners could not take aim in consequence of the clouds of dust which this feat would occasion. Shortly thereafter Speke turned back and made his way to Harar by some alternative route. He and Burton ran into a hot reception from the Habar Awal, and their mission ended acrimoniously amid bitter recriminations between the two explorers. Another explorer who had a better time of it in Dulbahante country was the man sent by the Royal Geographic Society to survey
the northern part of the land of the Somalis. He also noted the bitter intestine warfare that was ravaging the Dulbahante kingdom amid the schism between the two great lineages of the tribe. But his impressions were in similar vein to Speke, highlighting the overwhelming martial nature of the tribe, and their superiority as fighting force occasioned by their use of cavalry charges that gave them great mobility, and an irresistible battlefield presence. Cruttendon wrote,
Dulbahante are a nation who fight chiefly on horseback, their arms being 2 spears and a shield. Their horses are powerful and courageous, the breed descended, according to Somali tradition, from the stud of Suleiman, the son of David, and consequently highly valued. The Dulbahante, as far as I have seen them, are a fine martial race of men, second to none of the branches of Dawood either in conduct or appearance, and they are described as being courteous and hospitable to the stranger who visits them.
The abundance of horses in the Dulbahante country, and the prowess of the Dulbahante as horsemen, is recurring theme. Drake Brockman, a colonial civil servant during the Darwiish Wars, remarks on this in his book, British Somaliland. Previous to the expeditions against the Muller, the tribes which were, in all probability, the best off in horses were the Dulbahante, and after them the Ogaden. At all events, most of those in a position to speak are agreed that the Dulbahantes are the best horsemen among the Somalis. The next visitor to the Dulbahante country was one Harold Swain in the 1870s. He wrote extensively about northern Somalia in his book 17 Trips Through Somaliland. Swain wrote that, of the Somali tribes I have met on different expeditions, those having the most ponies are the Dulbahante, the Rear Amardan, and the Jabrail Aboker. In the Nugal country we saw enormous number, one man sometimes owning 150. This abundance of horses gave the Dulbahante great strategic advantage which they pressed relentlessly. It allowed them to cover huge distances. Swain records that the Dulbahante were a tribe addicted to raiding, and their horsemen rampaged down the coast, molesting the coastal trade centers of Bulaksar and Berbera. They also harried and looted the trade caravans coming from Mudug and Ogardenia. When Swain visited Kainabar, then occupied by the powerful Arasaim lineage of Ahmed Garrett, he witnessed large number of caravans that were Arasaim Magan. The caravans were afraid to venture towards Berbera, fearful of Maximurod Gerard horsemen. Swain writes that the people of Badwain had just come from Gosorain, driven from there by fear of Muhammad Gerard, and we were assured we would most certainly be attacked by that tribe if we held to our determination of going to Gosorain. We were further told that the plains were very open, and the horsemen as numerous as the sand, and that years ago a force of natives armed with 100 matchlocks had been completely wiped out there by a night attack. In the event, Swain's party did not meet the terrible Muhammad Gerard, but was instead given an escort by a detachment of Arasaim and Barkard horses who were themselves on the lookout against the Muhammad Gerard. Swain's party made a bivouac on the plain that night, but caution dictated to them that they not light any fires to avoid attracting the menacing attentions of the Muhammad Gerard cavalry. Swain in his travels comes upon, and mentions in his book one of the most glorious Tolbrahanty battle victories. Upon visiting Kinabar, he writes that he halted at a steep, flat-topped hill called Cub Ogaden, or the Ogaden Graves, where a great Ogaden army perished at the hands of the Dulbrahanter. He continues that the tribe was here in strength, with enormous droves of camels and ponies and flocks of sheep. For a mile round the wells were clouds of dust kicked up by the thirsty animals. It was amid the splendor of this majestic, sprawling kingdom that Ismaaciil Mire Sulmi was born to the Gulid Kaqoray branch of the Tolbrahanty. At the time of Ismaaciil Mire's birth, the Kaqoray were recovering from the bloody conflicts that convulsed their family after the vanity of Arden Garlaid and his expansive family lit the touchpaper to intestine wars that left an indelible mark on Somali history. The story has been immortalized by an aged Ismaaciil Mire in a poem intended as a cautionary tale against overweening pride, the kind that led to the cabal wars that shook the Kaqoray family. It started when Kumar Arden Garlaid Omar Aji was denied preeminence of place at the watering hole by one Maxamed Abdul Tabaran who, to emphasize his point that Omar Aji will not drink from the well, broke the cabal that was being used to water the camels. Kumar Aji promptly murdered Tabaran for his effrontery in standing up to a member of Arden Garlaid household. This set off a chain reaction that led to Kumar Aji being murdered at the site of a Bali watering hole, and settlement that to this day bears his name to commemorate this infamy. The name appears on some maps. It also led to massive Kavali wars that pitted the two brawling lineages of the Kaqoray against each other. Arden Garlaid, Kaqoray Jarmak and Buzalor were some of the personalities that took part in those wars and whose names were immortalized in those bloody and violent conflicts. Arden Garlaider's rashness and his role in prolonging the conflict were redeemed by the courage and sacrifice of his numerous grandchildren, and some of his own children, who in later years embraced the Darwiish cause and fought valiantly in the majestic cause of Somali liberation. Zid Arden Garlaid and 3 of Bainak's Arden Garlaider's children were killed in Jidbal, the disastrous engagement that nearly destroyed the Darwiish movement in 1904. Portions of Sayyid Maxain's Gubban poem read as a moving dirge in memory of the fallen Kaqoray heroes who were lost in that bloody encounter. Kaqoray Jarmak, the legendary warrior who put his mark on a Lebi, Porinsianer a later tree that was thereafter named Lebi Suntal, none allowed to sit under it, also had a role in prolonging the conflict. When a peace assembly was held, he asked the provocative question, "Can we have a living and breathing Kumar Aji restored to us?" When the obvious reply came that a living Kumar Aji was an impossible notion, he responded, "Peace will also be an impossible notion. Kumar Aji hadi lar heli wao, nabaidna lar heli mao." By the time of Ismaaciil Mire's birth, peace and amity was restored among the Kaqoray, and their prosperity revived, and it was in this milieu that young Ismaaciil Mire was raised. In his formative years he spent learning the Quran as well as imbibing the culture, poetry, and the ways of the Somali people. He was taught the indispensable arts of horsemanship, so vital to the warrior Tolbrahanty way of life. In a very short time Ismaaciil Mire emerged as a skillful leader of great courage and prudence. When the aggressive and predatory European colonialists arrived in Somalia and opened their mission schools and strangled the coastal cities of Somalia, Ismaaciil Mire was one of the Tolbrahanty leaders who were alarmed by this new development. When Sayyid Maxamed Abdul Xasan launched the Holy Darwiish movement, Ismaaciil Mire was one of the first people to embrace the course. For him, like all the Tolbrahanty, it was a choice between freedom and servitude, degeneracy and morality, treachery and loyalty. In short, it was a choice between right and wrong. The land of the Somalis can only be ruled by Somalis, and it was in the defense of the Somalia, its religion and culture, that he waged a relentless war of liberation that lasted for 2 decades. In the first year of the Darwiish movement, the Tolbrahanty, and Kaqoray in particular, formed a reserve elite force with modern arms numbering less than 1,000, bolstered by additional thousands of spearmen from the various Somali tribes of northern Somalia. As they moved into Ogardenia, large numbers of Maxamed Subir embraced the Darwiish course. The Ethiopians, upon hearing about the activities of the Darwiishes, sent out a large force from Harar. It was first feared that the Abyssinians were planning to advance as far as Dagakspor. In the event, they stopped at Jigjigar, and on the 21st of March 1900 a large Darwiish army made up of Ogardin spearmen engaged the Ethiopians at Jigjigar, but they were eventually repelled by the better armed Abyssinians, who themselves sustained not inconsiderable losses. The Abyssinian force was led by Garas Makbanti, who sent a detailed report of the battle to the English, no doubt self-aggrandizing and painting the Abyssinians in the best possible light. He writes that the Ria Keenay and Ria Haruyan abandoned the Darwiish movement amid accusations that the Darwiish leadership misrepresented the intelligence on Abyssinian fighting strength and sent the Ogardin into battle woefully underarmed. With the assault on Jigjigar, the battle for Somali liberation was well and truly joined. But it also dealt a heavy blow to the nascent struggle when the movement lost Ogardini confidence. On top of the grievances we noted above, the Ogardines complained that the Tolbahanti had the better arms and were spared from the suicidal Jigjigar assault. The final rupture with the Ogardin came when Maxamed Subir elders Garas Sarji Keenay and Xusin Yusuf Zersi Iljiks conspired at Gurdumi to assassinate the Sayyid. Sayyid Maxamed was saved from walking into an ambush after being warned by a man named Kabdi Garard Yusuf. The Sayyid was eternally grateful to this man. When the son of Kabdi Yusuf Garard came to visit the Darwiish Zaran, the Sayyid composed a poem that included the following lines. The epilogue to the Jigjigar campaign was that the Sayyid and 500 Tolbahanti special force that included Ismaaciil Mire, based at Haradijid, were attacked by a large raiding party of the Habar Yunus, who were after the Ria Keenay of the Ogardin. The Habar Yunus and Ria Keenay were engaged in a vicious war that unsettled the whole area. Unfortunately for them, they stumbled on the Darwiish reserve force, uniformly armed with modern rifles, and the Habar Yunus were cut down, losing between 100 to 150 men before retreating. This incident poisoned Darwiish/Habar Yunus relations for all time, compounded by the Dayax Wirar episode when Habar Yunus in the Udwain district were looted. Despite the Ogardin abandonment of the Darwiish cause, nevertheless the movement gathered strength in both men and material, and the Sayyid felt confident enough to take action against many of the tribes that were found to be intractable and refusing to join the course. A letter written to the J. Hay Sadler, the British consul at Berber, by one senior Drolimato, an Amharic-speaking Italian, observed that the Ras Makonnen and Garas Makbanti were not sanguine as to the Abyssinians successfully establishing their authority in the Ogaden. Sadler observes that Darwiish domination of the Ogaden would spell ruination to British trade. He also believed that if the fears of the Abyssinian leadership were to materialize, and the Sayyid became the undisputed master of the Ogaden, that it will mean that we shall be forced to have a permanent military occupation of the protectorate. By the middle of the 1901 the Darwiish army swelled to 32,000 men, and the British were so alarmed by the growing influence and power of the Darwiish movement that they launched an expedition headed by E. Swain, the brother of Harold, explorer of northern Somalia, to quell the rebellion once and for all. From that time until 1904, when the fourth and last British military expedition ended, the British and the Darwiishes fought a series of inconclusive engagements that ended with Sayyid being ceded large territory in from Mudug to Nugal. The history of these campaigns have been essayed extensively and need not be recounted here. The principal matter of this narrative is the role played by Darwiish commander Mujarid Ismaaciil Mire in the struggle to liberate Somalia from colonial domination. The second installment in this historic essay will trace the major military expeditions commanded by Mujarid Ismaaciil Mire and the poetry he composed to mark those victories.